You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie in the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, as we like to say, for yet another episode of Murder, Mystery, and the Macabre throughout history with two hosts who never met in real life, but are real-life friends.
That's right. We want to give a huge shout out to everyone who supports us by rating and reviewing our content and sharing with friends. There are tons of other ways to support our little independent podcast, and if you listen until the end, we'll tell you more about that. Now it's time to talk more about Jim Jones. Last week, we talked about his family background, his upbringing in childhood, and the first weird behavior patterns he showed, as well as the first ventures into religion and preaching. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, please go back and listen to last week's episode. We last left off when Jim was 17, and he and his mother left his father and their hometown in Lynn to move to Richmond, Indiana, 16 miles or 26 kilometers south of Lynn. There, Jim's mother, Lynetta, worked in a factory, and Jim was a senior in high school during the day and a night orderly at Reed Memorial Hospital at night. And that's where he met his future wife, Marceline Baldwin.
Marceline Baldwin was born on 8th of January 1927 in Richmond, Indiana, into a very respectable working-class family. She was one of 3 children. All 3 were girls, with Marceline being the oldest. Her parents, Walter and Charlotte Baldwin, provided a nurturing and stable environment, instilling in Marceline values of hard work, compassion, and service to others. This environment was further reinforced by the family's involvement in the local Methodist church, where these values were a core part of their faith and daily life. So growing up, Marceline was dedicated to her baby sister Sharon, who was a bit of a sickly child, even though Marceline herself had her own health issues at times. She was suffering from rheumatoid arthritis.
That's a tough diagnosis in a kid.
At that age especially, right?
JRA, yeah, that's a toughie.
She was a good student and exhibited a natural inclination towards helping others, a trait that was evident in her diligent approach to her studies and her desire to pursue a career in nursing. Her commitment to her education and her chosen profession reflected the strong sense of duty and compassion that had been instilled in her from a young age. Marceline's dedication to caring for others led, as we said, to attending nursing school, where she became a registered nurse. She began working at Reed Memorial Hospital in Richmond, where her professionalism and compassion definitely shone through. Her career as a nurse exemplified her nurturing personality and her unwavering commitment to service to others. When she started to work at Reed Memorial, she made the acquaintance of a young orderly, a boy still in high school, and of course, that's Jim Jones. From all I read, he was coming on to her kind of strong. She was 22 at the time, so 4 years older than Jim, and she was not used to a lot of attention from suitors. She was a very pretty young woman, but I think that she was a no-nonsense kind of person. She was studying hard, and maybe that could come off as a bit unapproachable, maybe?
Yeah, I think sometimes people who are introverted or a little bit shy can come off as aloof, in the same way that extroverts can come off as overwhelming. You know, it kind of goes both ways, you know? And I think also, when you compare literally anyone to Jim Jones. I mean, not many people are going to meet somebody like a Jim Jones or a Ted Bundy or that kind of figure when it comes to manipulative charisma, right? That's a whole other category of personality type that I imagine would be like being hit by a tidal wave.
I think it was a tidal wave. It was kind of a whirlwind. Before she met Jim, Marceline had actually made plans to move to Kentucky with one of her cousins, and the date for the move was set, and they already had a new job, I think, at a hospital there. And Marceline, as I said, usually was a no-nonsense person, and she was ready to leave Indiana. She had everything in order already. It then was obviously quite surprising when all of a sudden she was like, no, I'm not going, I'm staying in Indiana. And of course, the reason for her change of heart was the fact that she had just met a boy and fallen in love, which is very unlike her. In the meantime, Jim was still unsure if he wanted to become a preacher or if he should go into medicine. But ultimately, he decided against medicine and against a university education. I think he probably didn't want to study for years and years on end. Then the residency, it was maybe more time than he was willing to invest, and not only time, but of course money as well. And instead, he enrolled in a short course at Indiana University, Bloomington, where he took classes intermittently. And his brief stint at the Indiana University was more about exploring his interests rather than obtaining a formal degree. During this period, Jones continued to self-educate. He was immersing himself in religious texts, in social theory, and the writings of prominent socialists. Remember, last week we already told you that he was he was interested in socialism. Jones also attended Butler University in Indianapolis, where he took night classes while working various jobs. So he's you can say a lot of things, but he was definitely hardworking at the time. However, he did not earn a degree from Butler either. His time at Butler University was marked by his growing involvement in religious and social activism. How did you call that? Bible communism?
Bible communism, yeah.
Jones's lack of formal higher education did definitely not deter him from pursuing his ambitions. Instead, he leveraged his self-taught knowledge and charismatic personality to influence and attract his first followers.
After only a few months of dating, Jim started to talk marriage and how they would lead a life devoted to helping others. Marceline was in love and deeply impressed by Jim's sense of social justice and his determination. So she took him home to meet her parents, and it seems they accepted Jim because they trusted their daughter's good sense, but they probably weren't super impressed by his borderline communist rants. The couple got married on June 12, 1949, at Richmond's Trinity Methodist Church. It was a double wedding, with Marceline's younger sister Eloise marrying as well.
Another parallel we have to the Garfield episodes with the double wedding.
That's right. We actually have a description of the wedding from the Palladium item, Richmond, Indiana, Monday, June 13th, 1949, page 4. The title of the article is Sisters Wed in Double Rites at Trinity Methodist Church. And it says, quote, "Palms and bouquets of white flowers formed a lovely setting on the altar of the Trinity Methodist Church Sunday afternoon for the marriage of Miss Eloise Catherine Baldwin to Marion D. Klingman and Miss Marceline May Baldwin to James W. Jones. The brides are the daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Walter R. Baldwin. 2 large baskets of white gladioli, delphinium, and baby's breath were placed on either side of the altar. Low arrangements of the white flowers decorated the chancel rail. Tall white tapers burned in a pair of branched candelabra. The altar was banked with palms. Marking the pews were white flowers tied with bows of satin ribbons. Mrs. Klingman was gowned in a white nylon marquisette fashioned with a fitted basque waist and an off-the-shoulder bertha with a lace yoke. Tiny covered buttons fastened the gown in front, long sleeves tapered to points over the hands, and the circular skirt fell in a long train. She wore a rhinestone necklace, a gift of the bridegroom. Mrs. Jones' gown of nylon marquisette was styled with a shirred marquisette yoke and a wide lace bertha. The fitted bodice was fastened with tiny covered buttons, and the sleeves were long and peaked over the hands. The skirt was full and fashioned with a long train. Each bride wore a Juliet cap adorned with clusters of stephanotis at the temples to hold in place their fingertip veils of bridal illusion. They carried white Bibles. They carried white Bibles topped with white orchids sent from the Hawaiian Islands by Mary Daniel, a friend of Mrs. Jones. Streamers of satin ribbons tied in lovers' knots showered from the flowers and Bibles. Mr. Baldwin gave his daughters in marriage. End quote. So then we have just a photograph, and can I just say, whatever you were imagining in your head, dial it back a bit. Dial it back. It's a perfectly lovely double wedding. Like, perfectly lovely Sunday church service. Lovely.
Streamers of satin ribbons tied in lover's knots showered from the flowers and Bibles. And then you look at the photo and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Just like a couple.
That's not what I'm showering ribbons would describe it.
No. No, I mean, it's fine. Also, the branched candelabras, they're fine.
Everything is fine.
They're not, I mean, I wouldn't look at that and think candelabra. I do like the fact that you can see all those palms.
Yeah, there's a lot of palms. That's true. They didn't lie about that.
There's a lot of potted palm trees.
I don't even see flowers in the ribbons at the pews.
You can see the gladioli. The gladioli. Those ribbons on the pew, I would not have been satisfied with those. Those would not have met my very fastidious requirements for decor.
They look absolutely lovely.
It's fine.
The brides are beautiful, but Jesus, they look like babies.
They do look like children. They really do look like children. And that article was really selling it. But yeah, they look like don't get me wrong. It's really lovely. It's just that article compared to this photograph is...
Yeah, you would imagine it differently. You're gonna see the photo when we post it and you tell us.
You tell us. Are we mean? Maybe. It's a lovely photograph. Also, I think you wonder how things would have gone if they hadn't met at this time in history, right? Because back then, no one would have necessarily said to Marceline, this is all a bit quick, isn't it? Because things happened like that back then.
Yeah.
You know? So, as much as she loved him, their marriage was a roller coaster because being married to Jim Jones, surprise, surprise, it was not easy. It was his way or the highway, and it was several times that Marceline actually considered divorce. The couple moved to Indianapolis, where they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Marcy worked as a night nurse in a children's hospital, and Jim went to classes. At one point, they took in one of Marceline's young cousins, a 10-year-old boy who had been living with a foster family at the time. The cousin would later say in interviews that Jim was two-faced and that his outside persona was much different from his at-home persona. And I think we can all imagine that.
Yeah. I just find it interesting going back so much in his life that this person was always there, obviously. But you don't think about like last week we talked about how he already manipulated people and being charismatic as a very young boy.
Yeah. Yep.
But this was always in him.
Oh, always. Always. The manipulativeness and duplicitousness. Yeah. And they wanted to officially adopt this child, but the kid was actually like, no, and wanted to go back to his mother, which Jim Jones did not take that refusal well at all, did he? He was not happy.
He was not amused. No.
In 1954, Jim and Marceline adopt their first child, a daughter named Agnes, who was part Native American. In total, the Joneses would have 9 children, 8 of them adopted, and 1 biological son. As the adopted children were all different ethnicities, Native American, Korean, and Black, he began calling his family the Rainbow Family, a term he would also later use for his congregation of the People's Temple. And I just hate so much that he took something so nice and turned it into something so terrible.
Yeah, like everything so far is nice, right? I mean, adopting children, giving them a home is like...
This is it. Yeah, people are drawn in by the equality and egalitarianism of the group. And you can absolutely understand how it would be appealing to me. Like, oh, hey, there's this new group talking about like equality and equal rights. Like, yeah, tell me more. Nobody sidles up to these organizations. Like, let me join a cult that will ultimately destroy my life and probably kill me. That's never how it starts. Ever. And it's just interesting to see and to really, really see and look at how insidious these things are and how people suddenly find themselves in a cult.
Yeah, I mean, we said it already last week. Like, there are people who are like, this could never happen to me. Well, I have news for you. It could if they get you at the wrong time in your life.
And with the right combination of topics, you know? Yeah.
So Jim Jones was now pursuing his career as a preacher, and his unique blend of charismatic preaching, social activism, and genuine community service allowed him to attract a diverse following, and it laid a foundation for what would become both a haven and ultimately a horror for many. In the early 1950s, he began attending and preaching at various churches in Indianapolis. His oratory skills and passionate sermons quickly gained attention. In 1954, he was ordained as minister in the Independent Assemblies of God and later in the mainstream Disciples of Christ denomination. Jim Jones' early ministry was characterized by his commitment to racial integration and social justice, which, we're talking about 1950s. These were radical ideas in this context, right?
Yeah, very much so.
And we shouldn't forget that this was a time marked by significant racial tension. And, it was pretty much when the civil rights movement started. And Jim, who, as we said, had developed a keen interest in social justice and racial equality, he saw an opportunity to address these issues through his ministry. He believed that the church should not only provide spiritual guidance, but also actively work towards creating a more just and equitable society. Do you think he really believed that, or do you just think he figured that's his niche?
I honestly don't know. I'd like to think that there was some part of him that did believe that, but I suspect deep down that he
it's
realized...
It's hard to know, right?
It's hard to know. But that's probably how he got his wife. This is sort of the mask he wore that got him the most in life. And I think that's how people like this make decisions, isn't it?
So Jim Jones began his pastoral work within the Methodist Church. However, his radical ideas and unconventional methods quickly set him apart from the more traditional clergy. He was, as I said, passionate about racial integration. He often invited African Americans to his services, which was also controversial at the time.
It's again parallels with Garfield, right?
True.
Just not popular at the time, but, everyone is welcome and we mean it.
This commitment to inclusivity and social justice reasoned with many people who felt marginalized by mainstream society and traditional religious institution. And it's also a really more back to the roots idea of Christianity, right?
Right.
It's what Jesus would have
That's
done.
right.
The same thing. Now we need to talk about something that I really hate. There's a lot of things in this whole thing that I hate, but this is...
Yeah.
I think this is also the time he started the monkey business, and literally the monkey business. I need to give a content note. It did upset me on different levels. What happened was that back in the 50s and 60s, apparently, I had no idea, there was a thing in the US, probably in other countries as well, I don't know, where you could see classifieds in newspapers and magazines, where you could mail order pets. And that's horrible enough already. But also it was very often exotic animals, like for example, spider monkeys. I found one of those classifieds. Did you know about that, Annie?
Yeah, well, it's that same thing like Christian the Lion. Harrods used to sell lions. At this time in history, people sold all kinds of exotic. It's absolutely horrifying to think about today, but yeah.
Yeah, here you just got these, what were they called? These little sea monkeys.
Sea monkeys, yeah.
I always wanted to buy them because the drawing was like, Jesus, who doesn't want to have like
Look at them with the circus monkeys and yeah.
So I found one of these classifieds from a magazine. I think it was a comic magazine. And it's titled Darling Pet Monkey. And the price was $18.95. Quote, this squirrel monkey makes an adorable pet and companion, almost human with its warm eyes. Your family will love it. These young monkeys, well, it's these young
monkeys.
Because it's all caps.
They want to make sure you're going to get a young one with a lot of energy and not an old, sad monkey.
These young monkeys grow about 12 inches high. Eats same food as you, even likes lollipops.
Jesus wept.
Simple to care for and train. Live delivery guaranteed. Only $18.95 express collect. Mail check or money order for $18.95 to Animal Farm. It's a PO box in Miami.
Yeah.
Then it says free cage, free leather collar and leash, free toy and instructions included with each monkey. Loads of fun and amusement.
Jesus
End quote.
Christ.
I hate it.
Every single thing about this. I'm just imagining the first person who had no idea, like just no idea about monkeys in general. Can you imagine? And they were like, you know what? This sounds like a fucking great idea. Let me just go ahead and send $20 off to Miami for this monkey. And then was the house even standing after they brought home a monkey and gave it lollipops? Wild animals. It's so horrifying on so many. Like, there aren't even enough ways to discuss how upsetting this is. When we did that cruise years ago and we're in Costa Rica, one of the places we went to was a wildlife sanctuary, and it focuses on just this kind of thing. It's all animals that have been caught in the pet trade. And it's all everything you can imagine still to this day. You know, people are still trying to do this stuff. Yeah, don't buy monkeys in the mail.
So you'd mail the money and they'd mail you the animal. And the only redeeming thing about this all that is the fact that it was very often a scam and you wouldn't receive anything. And I'm like, that's fine by me. That's basically the outcome I would prefer, to be honest.
Definitely.
But at other times, they would indeed mail you a spider monkey, for example. And very often that poor monkey or whatever pet you ordered would arrive dead because obviously it's mailed to you. So that's horrible.
Yeah.
But now you're going to ask yourself, well, what does that have to do with Jim Jones? Well, he realized pretty soon that he wanted to create his own independent platform for his preachings. And so he needed to raise funds. And one of the ideas he came up with was to order spider monkeys and then go from door to sell them for $29 each. According to the inflation calculator, that would be $340 today. Selling monkeys served several purposes for Jones. Firstly, it provided a source of income, of course, which was essential as he was not yet established in his pastoral career. Secondly, it showcased his flair for the dramatic and his ability to capture people's attention. This ability to draw attention would later be a very significant factor in attracting followers to his church. And then Jones also used the monkeys as a fundraising tool for his fledgling ministry. By marketing the monkeys in an engaging way, he could attract potential donors and supporters. Thereby, he was laying the financial groundwork for what would eventually become the People's Temple. In a way, the monkeys can also be seen as a symbol of Jones's approach to his ministry. They represent his unconventional and sometimes very eccentric methods, I want to say, of attracting attention and building a following. And this symbolism would be a recurring theme throughout his career, as he often used very dramatic and unorthodox tactics to draw people to his cause. Selling monkeys allowed Jones to engage directly with people in their homes, giving him an opportunity to spread his message and build personal connections. This personal touch was a hallmark of his early ministry, where he emphasized the direct engagement and community building. The monkeys were not just pets, they were conversation starters that allowed Jones to introduce himself and his ideas to a broader audience. So imagine a knock on your door and there's Jim Jones in his Sunday finest that he wore every day and he has a monkey on his shoulder and you're like, hey, that looks fun. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, he would also give away monkeys for free to the member who would recruit the most new members. I read that the whole monkey business brought him a total of 300 new members.
Ugh, I just hate it so much.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. If you don't want to hear it, please skip the next 5 minutes or so, I'd say. And I want to add that, yes, usually we don't talk about the death of animals, but I feel this just shows early signs of cruelty in him. He was a person who always tried to appear kind and caring. Many of the monkeys that Jones sold were ordered from India, apparently, which is a long-ass way from India to Indiana. And they were not well cared for during transit or after they were sold, leading to a really high mortality rate. The conditions under which the monkeys were transported and kept were often inadequate, reflecting a lack of concern for the animals' welfare. This neglect resulted in many of the animals dying either before they were sold or shortly thereafter. So many of the monkeys arrived dead or barely alive. And Jim Jones even refused to pay the air freight bill for the few monkeys that were not dead. He basically just abandoned them at the warehouse where they would have died if it hadn't been for the good people working there and nursing them back to life. This is from the Indianapolis Star, Indianapolis, Indiana, Saturday, 10th of April 1954, page 1. Titled, Bottled Up in Customs. Given up by church, monkeys are saved spiritually anyhow. And it's written by Don G. Campbell. Quote, alternate sips of confiscated German applejack and mashed banana were credited yesterday with saving 2 starving monkeys here in spite of bureaucratic help that eventually involved 5 state and federal agencies and 2 airlines. 3 of the tiny primates crawling weakly over the body of one of their dead companions were the only survivors of a shipment of 7 monkeys imported here this week by a South Side minister, the Reverend James W. Jones. For the Reverend Mr. Jones, 22 years old, pastor of Christian Assembly of God Church, who innocently started the whole thing, it was the end of 2 weeks of bad luck with animal importing projects. A shipment of 2 gibbons and a monkey last week also ended disastrously when the 2 expensive apes died en route. The pastor of the South Side Interdenominational and Interracial Church said that he began importing and selling animals about a year ago as a fundraising project for his congregation. Ordinarily, he said, mortality among the animals amounts to only 5% of his shipments. End quote.
Like, that's fine. Like, normally, we only lose 5 out of every 100. Like, that's too many. It's just another reason you didn't know to hate him. And so we're just here to tell you.
Right?
How awful this man really was.
The thing is, the way Jim Jones handled the sale of monkeys, it also raised significant ethical concerns.
Yeah.
Selling animals in such poor conditions without proper care highlighted a disregard for their well-being. This disregard for the welfare of the monkeys can be seen as an early indication of Jones's willingness to exploit living beings to further his own goals. And we know this attitude would, of course, later manifest in very much more extreme ways in his treatment of human followers. Of course, you might wonder now why nobody gave a crap about the whole dead monkey situation. I mean, for one, you can say, okay, it's the 1950s, animal welfare wasn't that big of a deal. But actually, apparently, people got quite upset and they were like, what the heck, Jimbo? What's going on? And the whole story could have damaged Jim Jones' reputation in the early years of his ministry, and it would have been obviously an absolute blessing if that would have been the case. However, his charismatic persona and persuasive abilities often overshadowed these ethical lapses. He just had a talent for capturing public attention and redirecting it towards his broader mission, and that helped him mitigate potential fallout from such incidents. It's like, don't look at the dead monkeys, look over here.
Yeah. So now we're in the year 1955, and Jim Jones finally establishes the People's Temple in Indianapolis, Indiana. The name itself reflected his ambition to create a community that belonged to the people, transcending racial and economic barriers. The early days of the People's Temple were marked by a focus on creating an inclusive, socially responsible congregation that provided tangible support to its members and the wider community. Jones's preaching was characterized by a blend of Christian doctrine, Marxist ideology, and a strong emphasis on racial equality and social justice. He positioned himself as a champion of the oppressed and used his sermons to highlight issues of poverty, racism, and injustice. His charismatic oratory skills and genuine commitment to these causes attracted a diverse group of followers, including many African Americans and other marginalized individuals who found a sense of hope and community in his message. The People's Temple quickly grew in size and influence. Jones's dynamic preaching and the church's focus on activism and community service made it an attractive alternative to traditional churches. The temple offered a variety of social programs, including a soup kitchen, assistance for the poor, and services for the elderly. These initiatives were not just about charity. They were a practical demonstration of Jones's belief that the church should be a force for social change.
And that's how it should be. And I hate that he was the one who did these things.
That's exactly right. He's done enough good to bring good people in, and then he turns on them.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, because that's the other important thing. He wants to bring in good people. He doesn't want to bring in a bunch of problematic troublemakers, because that won't work with his long-term goals, right? Also, Marceline played a pivotal role in the formation and development of the People's Temple, as well as in supporting her husband. Her unwavering commitment, compassionate nature, and practical skills were instrumental in shaping the church's mission and operations. Marceline's influence extended beyond the traditional role of a pastor's wife, making her a key figure in the early success and stability of the People's Temple. From the outset of their marriage, Marceline Baldwin provided Jim Jones with a stable and supportive partner. Her background in nursing equipped her with a nurturing disposition and a strong sense of duty, qualities that complemented Jones's visionary and often radical approach to ministry. Marceline's belief in Jones's vision for a socially just and inclusive church was crucial in the formative years of the People's Temple. Her emotional and moral support helped Jones navigate the challenges of establishing a new religious movement. She was deeply involved in the church's daily operations, helping to manage various community service programs and outreach initiatives. Her experiences in nursing were particularly valuable in organizing health services and support for the elderly, sick, and poor members of the congregation. She played a significant role in creating and maintaining the social programs that were central to the temple's mission.
Jim Jones, as we already talked about last week, he took lots of inspiration from other people, Adolf Hitler being one of them apparently. And when he started to grow his church, one of the people he took inspiration from was Father Divine. Father Divine was born George Baker Jr. He was born around 1876, and he emerged as a significant figure in the religious and social landscapes of early to mid-20th century America. He was known for his charismatic preaching and controversial claims of divinity. Father Divine founded the International Peace Mission movement, which emphasized racial equality, communal living, and economic self-sufficiency. His teachings and organizational strategies left a lasting impact on his followers and influenced other future religious leaders, not just Jim Jones. We won't go into too much detail about Father Divine's background, just that much. He experienced a profound spiritual awakening in the early 1900s that transformed him into a charismatic religious leader. Adopting the name Father Divine, he proclaimed himself to be God incarnate, which became a central tenet of his movement. His message of divine equality and communal living began to attract a very diverse following, particularly among those disillusioned with the racial and economic inequalities of the time. In the 1910s and 1920s, Father Divine established the International Peace Mission movement. Initially, it was headquartered in Sayville, New York, and later in Harlem. The movement grew rapidly. Father Divine's teaching focused on living a life of purity, celibacy, and communalism. He vehemently opposed racial segregation and preached racial and gender equality, which drew a diverse group of followers known as angels. Father Divine was particularly notable for his economic initiatives. He created a network of businesses, including restaurants, grocery stores, and housing units, which were operated by and for his followers. And these enterprises not only provided affordable goods and services, but also offered employment and a sense of community. Additionally, the Peace Mission was renowned for its charitable activities, providing free meals, free shelter, and clothing to the needy, regardless of race or background. This all sounds amazing, right? Well, of course, there was also some controversy surrounding Father Divine. His claim to be God incarnate was met with skepticism, dare I say, well, obviously.
It's always a problem when someone's like, listen, actually, I am God. It's like, oh, no.
That's, Obviously, he was heavily criticized by other religious leaders and the public for that.
Yeah.
But the more he was criticized, the more followers he could gather. There's no bad publicity, let's call it like that.
Yep.
And these followers would defend him against everyone. Throughout his career, Father Divine faced various legal challenges, including charges of disturbing the peace and operating without proper licenses. He often used these legal battles to gain publicity and further his message, and also despite advocating modesty and communal living, of course, Father Divine lived in grand homes that included luxurious amenities. The most notable of this was Woodmount. It's a sprawling estate in Pennsylvania, and this estate featured a large mansion, tennis courts, and expansive grounds, serving as both his residence and the headquarters for the peace mission. Such properties were far from modest and reflected a high standard of living. Beyond Woodmont, the peace mission owned numerous properties across the United States, including other estates, hotels, and urban properties. But I also want to be fair, these properties not only provided income for the organization, but also housed the followers, blending organizational needs with luxurious living arrangements.
That's how you get away with it. It still happens today. Let's not pretend that this is like, oh, thank goodness this is in the past. This is everywhere today.
Also, what I found very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will find it interesting.
This is so good.
So he was married to Mother Divine, yeah? And after Mother Divine had passed away, Father Divine declared to his followers that her spirit had moved on, thankfully into the body of a much younger woman, the new Mother Divine.
So young, so firm, so refreshing.
Pretty convenient. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, God giveth, and just keep on givething.
So back to Jim Jones. He would sometimes travel to visit Father Divine to learn from him, and he started to encourage his followers to call him Father and Marceline Mother. He also probably took note of other techniques Father Divine used with his followers. He basically controlled every aspect of their lives, from their clothing, their housing, and their code of conduct. Alcohol and tobacco were strictly forbidden. The people were supposed to be frugal and lead a simple and modest life. And if they didn't want to follow the rules, well, there was peer pressure. People were spying on each other, and the wrong behavior was, of course, punished and could even lead to excommunication. And Jim Jones definitely liked that. He liked what he saw and learned there. Also, I kind of have the feeling he really wanted to take over Father Divine's followers after Father Divine would eventually pass away. He was already an elderly man, which is weird. Father Divine was God, so...
Yeah, but the first rule of Cult Club is we don't ask any questions about the obvious problems regarding the truthfulness of the leader, right? Like you just
have to accept.
Yeah, things just go off the rails at some point, and at that point, you're so emotionally and financially and spiritually vested that you just roll with it.
Taking advantage of vulnerable people is one of the things I think we both hate so much.
And it's also, anytime you end up with a cult situation, it's people who were vulnerable in weirdly specific ways, right? It's not just that they're taking advantage of disenfranchised people, poor people, people who have been persecuted against. It's all manner of people from all walks of society. And that's what makes it so difficult to see, right? Because everyone's in it for a different but same kind of reason. Everyone's in it for a good reason. And then it just all goes... Like, how does it just all go so wrong? If anything, I think we are trying very hard with this episode to humanize these people and kind of make it, not like we haven't said it a million times already, but like, you think you couldn't be the cult member? Think again. Think again. So now we're in the late 1950s, early 60s, and of course, we're at the height of the civil rights movement, fighting for the end of segregation and equal rights for everyone in America. And it had made its way to Indiana. Jim Jones, of course, was really working hard to help bring the cause forward. And one of the things he did, for example, is he did a lot of like publicity stunts to get attention.
Yeah, he wanted to be in the media.
That's
he wanted to be in the newspapers.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he went into restaurants in the city and he convinced them that he would bring them in a bunch of new customers as long as they agreed to serve Black people just as they would serve white people. And he was charismatic enough and a good talker, and so that did actually work. This, in turn, made Jim really popular in Black communities, and it did bring a lot of new followers. And as the congregation grew, so did Jones's ambition. In the mid-1960s, he relocated the church to Ukiah, California, in search of a more accepting environment and a greater opportunity for expansion. This move was part of a broader strategy to establish a network of People's Temple congregations across California. By the way, it's People's Temple, not People's Temple. Like P-E-O-P-L-E, no apostrophe. Because the apostrophe would signify ownership. So it's the People's Temple, no apostrophe. Jones's vision was, the apostrophe there though, it is his vision, was to create a large, influential organization that could not only support its members, but also exert influence, significant influence on broader social and political issues. But the move was also motivated by Jones's apocalyptic visions, which included fears of a nuclear war. This fear was rooted in the Cold War era's pervasive anxiety about the potential for nuclear conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Jim's apprehension about nuclear annihilation not only shaped his rhetoric, but also led to concrete steps to prepare for what he saw as an impending apocalypse. Jim started to frequently incorporate apocalyptic themes into his sermons and speeches. He warned his followers of an impending nuclear holocaust that would devastate the world. By emphasizing the imminent threat of nuclear war, Jones instilled a sense of urgency and crisis amongst his followers, compelling them to remain loyal and committed to the People's Temple. It was also used to justify the need for the temple to isolate itself from mainstream society, which Jones portrayed as corrupt and doomed. And Northern California was perceived as a safe haven and therefore became the new base for the temple's operations.
We're gonna get a lot more into detail about the whole paranoia thing in next week's episode, and also about the drug abuse that kind of poured more gasoline into this fire of paranoia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind. That's gonna be kind of an important part later on.
Oh, yeah.
Ukiah provided a fertile ground for Jones to build his community. He purchased a large property, and the temple members engaged in communal living and agricultural work, fostering a sense of self-sufficiency and solidarity. The temple's emphasis on racial integration, social justice, and community welfare again attracted a very diverse and dedicated following in California as well. By the early 1970s, the People's Temple had grown significantly, prompting Jones to expand operations to urban centers in California. He established major branches in San Francisco and Los Angeles, which became focal points for the temple's activities. In California, Jim Jones skillfully intertwined the People's Temple with local politics and social movements. He established connections with influential politicians, including the mayor of San Francisco and Harvey Milk. I think do we have to explain who Harvey Milk is? He was the first openly gay
man to be elected to public office in California as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. He would be assassinated for his beliefs later.
Yeah. There's a good movie with Sean Penn.
Yeah.
Even though I don't like Sean Penn, but that's
Same.
a good movie.
Yeah, agreed.
The temple's involvement in political campaigns, voter drives, and social justice initiatives bolstered its public image and provided Jim Jones with a significant political clout. I think he really much shifted away from more spiritual to way more political point of view. Point of view, I think, is what I'm trying to say. The San Francisco branch quickly became the headquarters of the People's Temple. The temple engaged in various community service projects, including running free medical clinics, food programs, and housing initiatives. Again, Jones' charismatic leadership and the temple's social activism garnered widespread support and more political influence. Also, the Los Angeles branch flourished, attracting new members through its message of social equality and the communal living and so on. Like in San Francisco, the temple in Los Angeles was involved in numerous social programs and had various community outreach efforts. But as the temple's influence grew, so did Jones's need to maintain strict control over his followers. He employed a variety of manipulative tactics to ensure loyalty and suppress dissent. He used his charisma and claims of divine authority, so I think we can all guess where he got that idea from.
Yeah.
And that's how he manipulated his followers. For example, If you remember in episode 1, we already talked about where he got his kind of ideas about preaching and the showmanship he kind of had, right? So what he did, for example, he frequently staged fake healings and miracles to reinforce his image as a prophet and a faith healer. Members also were subjected to intense indoctrination through regular sermons, meetings, and communal activities that emphasized absolute loyalty to Jones. He started to cultivate an atmosphere of fear and mistrust within the temple, which is that's where you already see the cracks. He also instilled a belief that external enemies were constantly plotting against the temple, justifying the need for secrecy and obedience. Dissenters and critics within the temple were publicly humiliated, punished, or expelled. Members were often isolated from their families and friends and all other outside influences. That's Cult 101. And this isolation reinforced their dependence on the temple and on Jim Jones, making it so difficult for them to leave or even question his authority.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're in this bubble where you constantly hear everybody is out to hurt you, to harm you. Everybody is against you and your group.
Oh, yeah. And this is also the time when the first allegations of sexual abuse are raised. By the early 1970s, rumors began circulating within the temple about Jones's inappropriate behavior with female followers. The rumors were initially kept within the confines of the temple, as members were often too afraid to speak out publicly due to the cult-like atmosphere and fear of retribution. But as Jones's behavior became more erratic and abusive, some former members and concerned outsiders began to speak out. In the early 1970s, defectors from the People's Temple started to publicly accuse Jim Jones of sexual misconduct. These accusations included claims that Jones coerced both male and female followers into sexual relationships, often under the guise of spiritual or communal necessity. Concerned relatives of temple members, along with investigative journalists, began to uncover and report on these allegations. Articles published in newspapers like the San Francisco Examiner and New West magazine in 1977 brought these allegations to the broader public's attention. These articles detailed various forms of abuse, including sexual exploitation. Jim Jones often used his charismatic authority and claimed spiritual powers to manipulate followers into sexual relationships. He framed these encounters as tests of loyalty or necessary for their spiritual development. Some members believed that submitting to Jones's advances was a way to prove their dedication to the temple and its mission. He preyed on vulnerable individuals, including those who were emotionally or financially dependent on the temple. He used his position of power to exploit these vulnerabilities, making it difficult for victims to resist or report the abuse. Isolated from their families and the outside world, temple members were subjected to intense indoctrination and control. This isolation made it easier for Jones to perpetrate abuse without fear of exposure. As more allegations surfaced, trust in Jones began to erode among some followers. While many remained loyal due to fear or indoctrination, others began to question his authority and intentions. A growing number of defections from the temple led to increased criticism and scrutiny. Former members who escaped began to share their experiences, corroborating the allegations and painting a disturbing picture of life within the temple. In response to the growing criticism and defections, Jones became increasingly paranoid and controlling. He tightened his grip on the community, leading to more extreme measures to ensure loyalty and silence dissent. So by the mid-1970s, growing scrutiny and allegations of abuse, financial misconduct, and human rights violations began to erode the temple's public image. In response to mounting pressure and media investigations, Jones decided to relocate the People's Temple to Guyana, establishing the agricultural project known as Jonestown. And this is the part that most people know about. But now you know the basic info on what happened way before all of that would take place.
And that's really just the basic info. Like, I really urge you to if you're interested in it, to read books like Road to Jonestown. I mentioned it already last week. That's a huge source for our episodes. There's a lot there, but I mean, as we said, this could be like a whole podcast just about Jim Jones and the People's Temple.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I think this is a perfect moment to stop for this week. Next week, we will be talking about the move to Guyana and the founding of Jonestown. And then we will need a part 4 to cover the most important part of all this, which is the horrible thing that happened with the massacre, the mass murder of more than 900 people.
Yeah, I'm not going to use the term drink the Kool-Aid anymore. Like, once you know more about everything, it's not really...
But also, I hate, this, I mean, we're going to talk about that in part 4, but this whole... Every time when people say, well, drink the Kool-Aid, pass the Kool-Aid, whatever, and then people come in and say, well, actually, it was not Kool-Aid, it's Flavor-Aid. And I'm like, yeah, that's factually true, but also, who cares?
Yeah, that used to be me. I used to be the person that was like, the details used to bother me, so I used to be like, it's Flavor-Aid, not Kool-Aid. But that is when I, like a lot of people, I think, believed that people drank it willingly. And that was not the case.
I get that.
Like, not even a little bit the case.
Who told me that? Or where did I read it? In our group maybe already? That there is this new documentary on Hulu, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. We don't have Hulu here. But apparently there's some footage that shows Jim Jones with Flavor-Aid and Kool-Aid. Like,
yeah.
Which is like, okay.
He's pointing out all the things. He's like, it's like, yeah, here are the bins of black-eyed peas, and here are bins of corn, and like, look at all the supplies we have here, and here's a ton of Kool-Aid. Look at all the Kool-Aid we have, and it's like,
Oh, really? That's how it went down?
Yeah.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched the documentary, and he's just giving a tour, but it's just like, yeah, here are the black-eyed peas, and here's the Kool-Aid. We have everything you'd ever want down here in the jungle.
Got it.
Yeah.
So now it's going to be like, well, actually it's Flavor-Aid. And then the people were like, well, actually it was also Kool-Aid.
I think it was actually a mix of both.
Probably. I think they mixed whatever they had. And we're going to get into that in episode 4.
Once it's mixed with cyanide, it all becomes kind of a moot point anyway.
So to end this on a more positive note, do you have something good?
No, everything is terrible. How are you?
You just came from a cruise.
I did. It was amazing. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. We had the most wonderful time in Bermuda and really loved it. I think the kids loved their first cruise and made some friends. And we went out of New York, so we took the kids to see Six, the musical. And my nephew Sam waited backstage and got pictures and autographs of a bunch of the cast. So it was a big success, I think, overall. It was a really, really nice time. Yeah.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
My something good is that my husband was just home for 10 days vacation, which was amazing and lovely. We took my mom and my nephew and my brother and a friend to see Falco the musical again.
Love it.
Can't get enough of it. So good. We had friends over for barbecue. We did a bicycle tour, and we just really enjoyed spending time with each other, and it was amazing.
I love that.
We really needed that, and
oh yeah,
the weather was lovely, and we stacked all of our firewood for the winter. So also that's a nice feeling to have that. We're like the ants.
Yeah, definitely.
Not the grasshoppers.
That's right. That's right. Oh, that's good.
I think that's it, right?
That's it.
If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please feel free, or please do us the huge favor, leave us a rating and or review, leave us a comment on YouTube or Spotify. We see all of them. We see Lisa from Texas. We see Brandy Jean.
Yep. It makes our day. Yeah, we've had so many really, really nice reviews lately, honestly. And it's just, I can't even tell you. Thank you. Special thanks to Gravy Girl and River Empath Precog and also Richard Simon. You all wrote super, super nice reviews and we're so grateful. Thank you.
Also for the person who left a comment on Spotify on the first episode about Amityville that it's too much. What did they say? Intro is too long or something like that. I'm very sorry, but that's how we do it here. It is what it is. It's not gonna change. I hope you still enjoyed the rest of the episode.
Oh, somebody didn't like the first episode of Amityville Horror?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like sometimes people just obviously search a topic and then they come across our content and they're like, why the hell do they tell me about Native Americans 500 years ago if I want to hear about Amityville? Which is fair enough.
Right. Well, you need to understand the history. If you're going to claim that there's a Native American spirit haunting that land, then we need to get into it, don't we?
Exactly.
Yeah, there are other podcasts out there that'll tell you the whole story in 20 minutes, but we're going to get into it. So if you don't want to know everything,
What else? Please join our Facebook group. Check out our Patreon. We're going to have the next get-together on tomorrow, Saturday, right?
Saturday. I was going to say it's this weekend,
James
isn't
Garfield.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
James Garfield. I've got some Garfield facts to discuss, and some. Are we going to talk about the Karen Reed trial a little bit, maybe too, because that's bananas, and we might have a. I don't know if we're going to have a verdict yet, but I can't believe we don't have a verdict yet. But we need to talk about it.
I wanted to say something. Wait, what was it? Oh yeah, it felt really good that what you listeners out there don't know, that before Annie left and my husband came on vacation, we were working like
80-hour weeks. We were just killing ourselves to get it all done. But we did it.
Researched, recorded, and edited 3 episodes in that time. And that's why Patreon got 2 early access episodes, because that was good. That felt really good. Giving me something a little bit early, like 5 days before everybody else had access to it.
I know.
So sometimes that happens. Check out freshhellpodcast.com. That's our webpage. There you find all the links to everything, also to our merch store. And that's it. Please tell your pets we said hi. Hug them, cuddle them, kiss them. Buy them sunglasses if they need it. Whatever they need, give it to them. And be kind to your pets. Be kind to your fellow human being. And the most important part of it all, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, it is hard. But just remember that you are enough and you are important and you do matter. And it's hot outside and things get hard in the summer. So as Churchill said, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
See you next week.
Oh, also leave water outside for all the animals and dogs passing by. That would be super nice.
Fill those bird baths. Yes. Yes. Provide clean drinking water when you can.
Tschüss.
Bye.